Hi, everyone. For my final project for this class, I decided to focus on children and families that have an incarcerated parent or a parent who has been incarcerated in the past. And then I'm going to combine that with reviewing the family resilience model and how we can use that model to buffer some of the negative effects that children face whenever they have an incarcerated parent. So kind of for an overview, I'm first going to dive into a little bit of mass incarceration and just discuss real briefly how that kind of started and how it affects families. Then I'll discuss negative outcomes for children with an incarcerated parent. I'll explain the family resilience theory and do a brief overview. And then I'll kind of combine the two ideas and through that discuss the strengths, weaknesses, application and future research that can be done to improve the way that the family resilience model can aid in children with an incarcerated parent. So when discussing mass incarceration, it's really a broad topic. So like I said, this is kind of just a brief overview. Basically, it started whenever tough on crime laws were enacted in 1970s. And this really started to spike the population of individuals in prison systems. Tough on crime laws were extremely discriminatory policies that ended up incarcerating thousands of individuals, majority of them within minority populations, but especially Black and African American populations. This caused families to be completely ripped apart. Men were stripped from their families and communities. There was over 2.3 million people within the prison system in 2008, which is a huge number, and that has changed over time. But in 2008 was really whenever it started to peak the most. So researchers have shown that 1 in 14 children will have a parent who has been incarcerated before their 18th birthday. So mass incarceration affects the entire family system, but also the communities and really society as a whole. The major increase in risk factors that are associated with parental incarceration negatively affect child development in multiple areas, which we'll dig into a little bit deeper here. So the first negative outcome that I kind of pulled from the research that I was looking at that children tend to have whenever they have a parent who has been incarcerated or who is incarcerated is negative mental health outcomes. A lot of children face discrimination and social stressors that kind of stem from their parents' incarceration and from the discriminatory factors that maybe are a part of their parents' incarceration. And all of this causes negative mental health outcomes for them. But there have been pretty direct links between having a parent incarcerated and having negative mental health outcomes. So some of these challenging factors include an increase in learning and developmental disabilities, behavior problems and speech or language delays, attention disorders and depression or anxiety symptoms, and many more outcomes that can cause a lack in positive and healthy development in children. So those are just a few of the different types of negative mental health outcomes that we see more common in children with an incarcerated parent. In regards to behavioral outcomes, a lot of children over time develop internalizing and externalizing behaviors. Part of this is due to the fact that when a member of your family or even in your community is incarcerated, it kind of shocks the whole system. So this doesn't just cause negative mental health in the person being convicted themselves, but also in other family members, specifically in other caregivers. So whenever other caregivers are affected and their depression increases, children can model that and kind of feel that energy. And they typically develop their own negative mental health outcomes, like I discussed in the previous slide. And these can lead to internalizing and externalizing behaviors. So again, it can increase those feelings of shame, depression, anxiety. But as far as externalizing, we see a lot of behaviors such as outward aggression, impulsive behaviors, or hyperactive behaviors. A lot of these are seen in the school systems, as well as in caregiving settings. Another major negative outcome for children with an incarcerated parent is the idea of reduced financial support. It's pretty obvious that having a family member incarcerated not only causes an extra financial burden, because typically the family has to help pay for those fees and fines, but it also takes away usually a whole other person's income. Because of this, this can cause extra stress on a parent who has to stay at home and figure out how to provide for their child, overall resulting in more negative developmental outcomes. Lastly, children have to deal with a lot of stigma within that shame, isolation, and loneliness. As we know, incarceration is a very negatively associated factor within society. A lot of labels are put on the parents, which then typically causes children to de-identify from their parents, which can cause desensitizing behaviors. A lot of times children will experience disenfranchised grief, which is a type of grief that can't be openly talked about or supported, increasing the isolation and loneliness that they may be experiencing. While I don't have a lot of time to dive deep into the family resilience theory, some of the main things that I wanted to point out is the idea that it helps with adaptive self-stabilization. It really pulls out a lot of family strengths and protective factors to help aid in the development of promotion of resilience, and it helps restore balance within the demands and capabilities of a family system. All of these things are really critical whenever working with an incarcerated individual and their family. Those main key areas would help really provide all the resources. I shouldn't say all, most of the resources that families need to adapt to a new family functioning, as well as promote healthy development in the children. Different research studies have been done that look at programs where family members have been incarcerated and uses essentially different factors of the family resilience model to be able to promote positive development. A lot of it focused on increasing social support, as well as decreasing externalizing behaviors by increasing positive parenting skills to try and help buffer some of those mental health outcomes that happen in both caregivers and children who have these experiences. There's a few weaknesses. There's some limited research on the actual combination of the family resilience model and children with an incarcerated parent. And then majority of studies, the other main weakness is that majority of studies typically focus on how to increase intervention for children with an incarcerated parent and the surrounding experience, but not necessarily on how to increase the coping mechanisms in children surrounding the different reasons for parental criminality or offenses. So really taking it even to a broader context and working on more long-term solutions. There's a lot of future directions that could be taken from this research. A lot of it needs to mostly go into increasing the research around broadening the samples and things like that, and the concepts in context of where the research is taken. That way we can really get a better hold on how children are directly affected through parental incarceration. But one other simple thing that really needs to be done is that knowledge about the way that parental incarceration affects children really needs to be taken into account and increased in all kinds of professionals and practitioners, from teachers, physicians, counselors, social workers, politicians, and lawmakers, all to help them continuously educate and learn different positive interventions, which would then decrease stigma surrounding these situations and increase the social support and mental health outcomes. Here I have some references if you want to look more into some of those studies that I found. And thank you. I really appreciate it.